Welcome to Fundamentals of Cybersecurity, CSCI150N. This is Chapter 15, Types of Attacks and Malicious Software, and I'm your instructor, Peter Keurig. In this chapter, you will learn to describe the various types of computer and network attacks, including denial of service, spoofing, hijacking, and password guessing. Identify different types of malicious software that exist, including viruses, worms, Trojan horses, logic bombs, time bombs, and rootkits. Explain how social engineering can be used as a means to gain access to computers and networks, and describe the importance of auditing and what should be audited. So in this video, we'll go over avenues of attack, malicious code, attacking computer systems and networks, advanced persistent threat, tools, and auditing. So avenues of attack. A computer system is attacked for one of two general reasons. One, it is specifically targeted by an attacker because it has something that they want or need it to do. Or two, it is a target of opportunity. It's a system that's available for them to take advantage of. It may not have been specifically sought out by them, but they found it and they're going to use it. Minimizing the possible avenues of attack by understanding the steps an attacker can take, you can limit the exposure of your system and minimize the possible avenues an attacker can use to exploit the system. And here I got some books showing some of the tools and techniques that are used by hackers and attackers. So once you've completed this course, I highly recommend, number one, your learning never stops. But check out some of these books. Either maybe your library has it, I don't know, or you can order them on Amazon, and you'll find these very helpful in learning how the hackers do it. And the best defense is knowing how the offense works. So learn what you can, be as wise as wolves and as harmless as doves. So one of the avenues of attack that is used is called malicious code. Malicious code or malware refers to software that has been designed for some nefarious purpose. Such software can be designed to cause damage to a system, such as deleting all files, or it can be designed to create a backdoor in a system that grants access to unauthorized individuals. Most malware instances attack vulnerabilities in a program or in an operating system. This is why patching of vulnerabilities is so important, for it closes the point of entry for most malware. Malware can be fairly complex in its construction, with specific features designed to assist malware in avoiding detection. Sometimes it's encryption or using self-replication or changing its own code and how it methodology, how it works. Or if it's beaconing out to a command and control server, changing where it's going to each time it beacons out. Modern malware can be multi-part in construction, where several pieces work together to achieve a desired effect. When malware has multiple different objects that it specifically attacks, it's called multi-party. A good example of this is a malware known as Flame. You're welcome to research it, where there is a baseline malware, and they have plug-in modules to it that does different things, including the ability to take over the camera on your computer or the microphone and record things, the ability to put in modules that search for certain types of files or captures keystrokes or things of that sort. So that provides a good example of a complex construction with different modules built into or that can be added to the malware that's infecting a system. Many types of malware can include a changing encryption layer to resist pattern matching detection. These are called polymorphic. If the malware actually changes the code at the time of infection, this property is called metamorphic. So think of metamorphosis as in changing, like a metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. The changing code is specific to malware. So when we think malicious code, usually one of the first things that comes to mind is a computer virus. A virus is a piece of malware that replicates by attaching itself to another piece of an executable code, such as a program or macro or something of that sort. When other executable code is run, the virus also executes and has the opportunity to affect other files and perform any other nefarious actions that was designed into it. So some examples are boot sector viruses. These are usually infect the boot sector of your hard drive or bootable disk. Used to be floppies, but it could be a USB drive or a CD, even a CD-ROM now if it's burned into it at the time of its burning. so that it executes upon the booting of the system. Then there's program viruses, which kind of what we just talked about a moment before, where it can attach itself to the code of a program. So let's say Microsoft Word or Outlook, or maybe a video game that you play. It becomes part of the executable code, and when it runs, when you run that program, it runs the virus along with it. It loads it into memory along with it. So back many, many years ago, back in my college days, a big thing that a lot of people were doing was sharing software on the internet through what was called wares sites. It's all pirated software, games, tools such as Adobe, Photoshop, or whatever. They'd be put out on these websites, and more often than not, most of those had some kind of a virus infection in them. But people would download it because they wanted the free software, and with it they'd bring down the virus with it. Macro viruses was something that kind of showed up in the late 90s as part of Microsoft Word documents. The viruses would be programmed into macros within Word, and were capable of doing quite a few things. It's not a common thing to see anymore because most antivirus looks for it, and also when you go to open up a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet or anything that has a macro attached to it, Microsoft asks you if you want to execute that code. So one thing you want to do is make sure you never disable that warning screen for all macros, because you might open up a Word document you download off the internet and not realize there's a macro, and if you don't at least have that warning, you could allow it to execute. Other ways of avoiding virus infections. Well, first off, don't download any software from unknown sources in non-reputable sites or non-reputable programmers. So, for example, if you have a choice, and I see this a few times out there, where you go to a website and it says, this site needs Flash, download from there, and you look at the URL that it's pointing you to, it's some site that's not Adobe. If you really need Flash, go directly to Adobe yourself, www.adobe.com, and download the Flash player directly to your computer, and then go back to this website you wanted to view with Flash and refresh it. But you'll often see it where it'll say your Flash is out of date or something like that, and they're really just trying to get you to install a virus-infected or malware-infected version of Flash. Two more things to note about viruses. There are two advances in virus writing that have made it very difficult for antivirus to detect. These advances are the introduction of the stealth virus technique and the polymorphic virus. A stealth virus employs techniques to help evade being detected by antivirus software. This usually because antivirus software uses checksums, or as if you remember earlier in the semester, where we did hashes of software, they will have hashes of a virus signature in your antivirus database. So it looks for that. So if they could find a way to change, when writing a virus, change how the software or the virus that they have hashes each time it replicates, then it becomes a lot harder to detect with antivirus software. That would be your stealth virus and polymorphic. Viruses attempt to evade because they change the virus itself. The virus kind of evolves over time. It learns, and because it's changing, it also, in some sense, is like the stealth virus in that the checksum or the hash for that virus is changing as the virus evolves itself. So one, it's just changing how it looks, or how its checksum and hash are detected, and the other one, it actually is changing the virus itself and how it works, which changes the signature as well. A good example of why you never rely on 100% on antivirus software. I'm not sure if I've mentioned this in previous chapter, but my son downloaded a video viewing program to view some videos for his schooling. It was recommended that he download this particular software by the school, and so he did, and he went about his merry way for school for an entire year. About a year later, he gets a antivirus pop-up on his computer it had just detected with a update of his virus signature, and we were using McAfee at the time. It just updated the signature and detected the virus that was in this free video player, and it was there for an entire year on his computer. And when I did a deeper dive into what the malware or virus did, I found that what it did was it took all of the documents in the all the users' document folders, all the users' pictures folders, and all the users' desktops, and sent them out to a website. So they were exfiltrating as much information as they can, probably looking for financial data like financial documents, credit card numbers, social security numbers, birth certificates, or whatever they could find on people's computers when they installed this software. So antivirus is good and should be on all the systems, but don't let that be the end-all be-all, because viruses change and new viruses come out all the time that the antivirus doesn't detect until there's a signature for it, or it does some kind of activity that triggers it through its heuristic analysis. So worms are a piece of malware that attempts to penetrate networks and computer systems and replicate itself across a network. Once a penetration occurs, the worm will create a new copy of itself on a penetrated system, and reproduction of a worm thus does not rely on attachments of a virus to another piece of code or to a file. It basically runs as its own piece of software. Viruses are generally thought of as a system-based problem, and worms are considered a network-based problem. Protection against them. To protect yourself against worms, those that attach and propagate through email can be avoided by following the same guidelines as about not opening files and not running attachments unless you absolutely know where they're coming from, and also by using firewalls and anti-malware, antivirus software. You should be able to detect most known worms. Worms tend to not go unnoticed for a long period of time. Unless you are part of a 0-day with the worms, I would say that the likelihood is much lower of being affected by a worm as you would be by a virus. Just make sure systems are properly patched, and unnecessary services on systems are turned off, like email server if you're not running email off that server. And that your firewall is on and only allows the necessary traffic through. And it can be easily detected by a intrusion detection system, IDS. Polymorphic malware, we kind of just talked about it. The code itself, or the way that it talks, modifies itself. The detection of malware by anti-malware programs is primarily done, as we said, through signatures, and files are scanned for a section of code in the executable that acts as markers, unique patterns of code that enable detection. Just as the human body creates antigens that make markers and proteins, anti-malware programs detect malware through a unique marker present in the code of malware. Malware writers are aware of the functionality of antivirus and anti-malware programs, and so they write the polymorphic code, which changes on a regular basis, and these changes or mutations are designed not to affect the functionality of the code, but rather to mask any signature from detection. So imagine, if you will, with when we were doing the hashing of messages, if you were to change a single thing, like add a period someplace, or add a hashtag or whatever, it would change that entire hash for that file. So with the same thing with the polymorphic code, if they can change one or two things that doesn't affect how it works, it will change how that code is hashed. Trojan horses, just like the legend or the myth goes about the Trojan horse, it is basically something that comes to you that you are willing to run because you expect it to be good, or it's something that you want to run. I was talking about Photoshop on the on these sites or whatever. Well, the Trojan horse is the piece of malware that's hidden inside a piece of legitimate software that you want. Once again, the best way to avoid this is to only download software from reputable sites, either sites like CNET or reputable redistributors, or directly from the organization or person who created it that you trust. So directly off Adobe or Oracle or Microsoft. Next, there are rootkits, which are a form of malware that's specifically designed to modify the operating system of a computer and how it functions. Over history, it began back in the Unix operating system, but now you can find them in Windows and Apple and any others basically at this point. It can do many things. In fact, it can do virtually anything that an operating system can do. It can modify the operating system kernel and supporting functions, changing the nature of how the system operates. They're designed to avoid either subversion or evasion, and so it's very hard to get out once they're in, and very hard to detect. They can change thread priorities within the software running on the system, so therefore it can affect how your antivirus works or what your antivirus has access to, and maybe prevent them from being able to read the code for the rootkit that's there and look for signatures. It can perform key logging, act as a sniffer. It can hide files, and it can create backdoors. Use of rootkit's functionality to hide other processes and files enables an attacker to use a portion of a computer without the user or the applications knowing that it's happening. This hides exploit codes from antivirus and anti-spyware programs and acts as a cloak or invisibility. There are 5 types of rootkits. There's firmware, which attacks the firmware on a system, which is really bad because it's happening before the operating system actually loads. There's attacks on virtual machine level, so they'll know if it's running inside a virtual machine or not, and be able to perform specific attacks that allow to manipulate its virtualization. There's attacks on the kernel of the operating system itself. There's attack on libraries used by the operating system. So those are like the DLL files. And then there's application level, which attacks specific applications. And finally, there's logic bombs. As it sounds, it has to do with logic, or something is done on the computer system in order for it to properly work. It might be that you press a series of keys. It might be that you run a piece of software at a certain time during the day, or you open up another file using a piece of software. Whatever it is, it's usually a set of events that happen that triggers the logic for it to happen. They're a type of malicious software that is deliberately installed, generally by an authorized user. A logic bomb is a piece of code that sits dormant for a period of time until some event invokes a malicious payload. An example of a logic bomb would be a program that's set to load and run automatically that periodically checks on the organization's payroll and personnel database for a specific employee, and if that person is no longer there, it executes and deletes important corporate information. So it's kind of like a dead man switch. If that person all of a sudden is no longer working for the organization that loaded it, it seeks his revenge and basically annihilates whatever he decides he wants to annihilate. If the event invoking the logic bomb is a specific date or time, they often refer to it as a time bomb, or a cron bomb in some other cases. Logic bombs are difficult to detect because they are often installed by authorized users, and in particular by administrators who also are often responsible for security. So it becomes an insider threat issue. People can seem very, very trustworthy, but you basically tick them off, you threaten their job or take away their job, and they could become unstable people. So background checks, knowing if people have been terminated in the past, are your best ways to avoid it. And in order to detect it, you want to do things such as separations of duties and job rotations. So if you're rotating people through certain jobs over a period of time, when one person is moved out, the idea is that the next person would see discrepancies or suspicious things that were done by the previous person. Continuing with our exploration of malicious code, we have spyware, which is software that spies on users, recording and reporting their activities. Typically, it's installed without the user knowing. Spyware can do a wide range of activities. It can record keystrokes, known as key logging. It can gather information on what files are on a system. It can monitor how a user uses a specific piece of software. For example, some of you who used to play games might know of a piece of software called Punkbuster, which looks for how people play games, will look for specific users, and blocks them from game servers for cheating at games. Often you would see these in free software, like toolbars or tools such as Groupon or whatever. Some of it is malicious, and some of it is just marketing, trying to gather what information they can about users in order to better target them with advertisements and things of the sort. Many uses of spyware seem innocuous at first, but unauthorized monitoring of a system can be abused very easily. In other cases, the spyware is specifically designed to steal information. Many states have passed legislation banning the unapproved installation of software, but many cases of spyware circumvent this issue through complex and confusing end-user license agreements. So read your end-user license agreements before you click yes for an install. You'll be surprised what you find in there, what you're agreeing to. If you're not careful, you could click yes for something, and next thing you know, you're getting a knock at the door, and Bill Gates is there asking you to be his towel boy because you agreed to install a piece of software. All right, so that's an extreme. But the point is that your licensing agreements, a lot of times, will tell you what they're going to do with the data that they're gathering from your system. And if you're not reading it, you might be allowing them to do something you're not comfortable with. So spyware kind of leads into adware. Adware is something that is used by some software, some free software, to generate revenue. So you'll get as I was talking about, the toolbars that you can install on a system, and it will monitor what you're doing for browsing and offer you advertisements based upon your activity and your history. Another thing is, so you might install an add-on for your web browser, a legitimate one, and we saw this for a while with Flash and even Oracle Java, where they had adware in there as well. They removed it now, but they're just trying to make money off of something they're giving out for free, and you're agreeing to it when you install the free stuff. Often they provide pop-ups or other ways of advertising. Maybe when you register for the software, you start getting spammed, things of that sort. Botnets is pretty much, there's no real legitimate use of botnets. I think the closest thing to legitimate botnet I've ever seen, if you want to call it that, would be the SETI project, the SETI at Home, where basically you agree to put a piece of software on your computer, and it uses unused processor cycles to process data on radio wave data. Is looking for ET phoning home or whatever. It's looking for radio waves from some kind of alien civilization. But outside of the SETI at Home, and I think there was one other one. I think there was a project where they were trying to crack the RSA algorithm. Outside of those two projects, there's really no reason for a botnet piece of software to be on your system. So for the most part, most of it is malicious. It have a wide range of consequences on a machine. It's from relatively benign to extremely serious. One form of malware that is seemingly benign is to use it as to be a zombie. Hackers create an army of machines by installing malware agents on the machines, which they call zombies, and these collection of machines are called botnets. The zombie machines are used to conduct their other attacks and to spread spam and other malware. Botnets have grown in networks of over 1 million nodes and are responsible for tens of millions of spam messages daily. The book lists a few famous ones. Many of them are dismantled, and usually new ones pop up. They can get pretty tricky. They have most botnets have what they call a command and control server that manages the zombies, and they'll have multiple of them. So if they try to take down one command and control server, the bots will try to find another one, and it's a cat and mouse battle. Backdoors and trapdoors are pretty straightforward. Backdoor is basically something that was put into the original software that allows somebody to circumvent the normal security on the software and get right in. A lot of times they were put in as, let's say, for a video game or a piece of software, they're put in there for support purposes, but in reality, as much as they might help them to support the product, it makes a means for bad guys to come in and do harm to your system. The obvious problem with these things, even the ones that are meant to be there to help administrators get into the systems, is they become trapdoors. They're typically hard-coded, and they cannot be removed. So if an attacker learns of a backdoor, all systems running the software will be vulnerable to the attack, which is why when many years ago the NSA had asked Microsoft to put in a backdoor or a trapdoor in a Windows, Microsoft fought back, because the idea was that if the NSA had it, even though they wouldn't tell anybody they had it, all it takes is one person to find out who's not in the NSA or whatever, and that information spreads, and it would have done a lot of harm for Microsoft. So Microsoft did not go with it. The term a backdoor is also most commonly refers to programs that attacker can install after gaining unauthorized access to a system to bypass the normal security that's on that system. So it might come in a virus or a Trojan, and once you run it, there's a backdoor, a way for them to get around their systems. Sometimes they're also called hooks, but the book doesn't seem to address it that way here. Ransomware is becoming big and popular now. We're seeing more and more of it out there in the last couple of years, to the point where DHS and FBI are spending a significant amount of time working with major corporations who are getting hit with this. What ransomware basically is a piece of software that gets onto the system. It can come in as either a time bomb, or it can come in as a piece of malware embedded in something else, and either immediately or after a period of time, it basically encrypts all of the data and files on a system and requires that you pay a ransom of Bitcoin in order to get the key to unlock the encrypted software or files. Now, early versions of ransomware, there was ways to undo it, because really what happened was it would encrypt and then it would delete, but the files weren't actually deleted from the hard drive. They were there, just not in the file allocation table. So there were ways to recover some of that data. However, they've gotten very tricky with it when enough people hadn't been paying their ransom, and they found that people were restoring it off of the hard drive sectors itself. That they rewrote or they modified the ransomware, and now a lot of them will do overwrites of the unencrypted version of the file to ensure that the data is no longer available for some kind of recovery, and only the encrypted files are there. And then in this case, the victim of the ransomware has to make a decision. They can either A, choose to pay in Bitcoins usually, in order to get the password to get the files unlocked, in the hopes that the password given to them is a correct one that really does work and they really get their files back. Or they can take whatever the loss is and try to rebuild everything. I know I said that sometimes this can be a time bomb. And the reason why the time bomb is important to note is because if they wait a period of time, let's say a period of 6 months from the time it's infected to the time that it kicks off, and it goes undetected for that period of time, the ransomware becomes a part of all the backups the organization has. So if it's in their backups, it's very hard for a corporation to just say, nope, we're not paying this, and restore everything from some kind of a backup. Because you know what? If it's in all of their backups, the minute they restore it, it's gonna kick off. And when it does do it, some of them are even designed that after a period of time, it destroys the systems that it's on if the ransom is not paid. So they're getting very tricky. They're getting very malicious with it, and they're also making a lot of money with it. A lot of companies are just choosing to pay because the cost of paying for it is lower than the cost of trying to recover from it. So they take the risk, they assume the risk, and they pay it. Even though the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are recommending against paying the ransom, people do choose to do it. Malware defenses. Most important, as we've said before, antivirus software. It's good for detecting what's known out there. It doesn't, unfortunately, help you with a 0-day, but you know what? Any defense you can have, you want. Make sure you use a reputable antivirus software. Those of you who have Windows 10 know that it comes built into the system. That's good. That's fine. But you might choose to go with something from another vendor. I prefer McAfee myself, or Symantec. There are others out there. Kaspersky is a Russian company. Just keep in mind that they have regular meetings with the Russian government. So if you want a company that is Russian with access to the Russian government, on your system, that's fine. That's your choice. They do have some good quality products, but I'm myself am kind of sketchy about putting any of their products on. There's AVG, which is I believe German, and let's see, there's Clam AV. There's a lot of different antivirus software that's out there. Many of it's reputable. So you can do your research, or you can rely on Microsoft. That's up to you if you got Windows 10. Apple, same thing. There's lots of reputable software out there. I know everyone wants to get the software for free if they can, and there are some good free ones out there. But make sure that you're choosing one that's going to protect you. And then keep your software up to date. We've said this multiple times, over and over again. Unpatched systems with the vulnerabilities that are known but not patched are your biggest risk. And then obviously don't just run any piece of software or open up any file that you get in an email or download from the internet, because it could be infected. If you don't know where it's coming from, if you haven't validated it, you have a good chance of it being malware. So besides malware, there's other types of attacks that can do some damage to systems or affect their availability. So the first is like denial of service attacks. And there's different types of denial of service attacks. There's a standard denial of service attack like a SYNAC attack, which is run by a single computer against another. Or you can have a distributed denial of service attack where you have thousands or hundreds of thousands, maybe even a million zombies in a botnet all attacking one computer at the same time on the internet, basically forcing it off. Some denial of service, distributed denial of service attacks can get up into the gigabytes of gigabits of network traffic going across the network at one time against a single system, basically overwhelming the capability of the internet service provider to provide the bandwidth in order for that system to keep working. Then there's SMRF. SMRF is a specific denial of service attack where the attacker sends a spoofed packet to the broadcast address of a network, which distributes the packet to all systems on that network. And further information on that is under address spoofing section. Defense against denial of service attacks. One important precaution is to ensure that you have applied the latest patches, as we've said before, and upgraded your system and applications running on them. Once specific vulnerabilities are discovered, it does not take long for multiple exploits to be taken or written to take advantage of it. Generally, you have a small window of opportunity in which to patch your system in between the time the vulnerability is discovered and the time the exploit is widely available. A vulnerability can also be discovered by hackers, and exploits provide the first clue that a system has been compromised. So it's detected after the attackers have actually used it. Attackers can also reverse engineer patches to learn what vulnerabilities have been patched, allowing them to attack unpatched systems. Another approach involves changing timeout options for TCP connections so that attacks such as the SYN flood attack are more difficult to perform because unused connections are dropped more quickly. For DDoS attacks, much has been written about distributing your own workload across several systems so that any attack against your system would have to target several hosts to be completely successful. While this is effective against some DDoS attacks, if large enough DDoS networks are created with tens of thousands of zombies, for example, any network, no matter how much the load is distributed, can be successfully attacked. So such an approach also involves additional cost to your organizations to establish this distributed environment. So addressing the problem in this manner is actually an attempt to mitigate the effect of the attack rather than preventing or stopping an attack. To prevent a DDoS attack, you must either be able to intercept or block the attack message or keep the DDoS network from being established in the first place. Tools have been developed that will scan your system, searching for sleeping zombies, waiting for an attack signal. Many of the current antivirus and spyware security suite tools will detect known zombie-type infections. The problem with this type of preventative approach, however, is that it's not something you can do to prevent an attack on your network. It's something you can do to help keep your network from being the attacker on another network. war dialing and war driving. If anyone remembers the movie War Games, basically war dialing was a piece of software that went through a series of numbers, phone numbers, looking for computers to answer on the other end. I remember these in my early days of computing, and we used to use that to find bulletin board services that weren't advertised but were open to new members. In case of the movie, the intent was to find a machine that the game attack with games. In the case of the movie, the intent was to find a machine with games the attacker could play, though obviously an attacker could have other purposes once it was obtained. War dialing is surprisingly successful, mostly because of rogue modems. There's a lot of them out there that some organizations have forgotten about for years. Unauthorized modems attached to computers on networks by authorized users. Generally, the reason for attaching the modem is not malicious. Usually, it's to support a system or whatever, or to provide some kind of telework capability to a user. And then there's war driving. That's basically driving around looking for wireless networks and connecting to them. Frequently done while driving near a facility. Wireless networks have some obvious advantages. They free employees from cable connections to a port on their wall and allow them to move freely through a building and still be connected. But if you remember when we were talking back in the wireless section, you want to make sure the access points are more inside the building so that less of the signal bleeds out, and hopefully by the time it gets to the road where the war driving could be going on, there's not a signal there that they can connect to or detect. Social engineering relies on lies and misrepresentation in order to get users to do things that the attacker wants. They could be absurd as a Nigerian prince wanting to give you millions of dollars by helping him transfer his millions out of his country by giving your bank account information to him, or having somebody from Windows, not Microsoft, Windows, call you directly and say, you have a virus on your system and I'm calling you to let you know that, and I'm here to help, to some very sophisticated ones. And if you remember the video of the takedown of the car dealership, they used social engineering. They knew that salespeople were looking for buyers, which allowed them to come in pretending to be buyers in order to get more information, things of that sort. I've used social engineering to do physical penetration into facilities that I should not have had access to as a means of testing their security. So social engineering, you can do a lot of things. You can use it to get physical access to a place. You can use it to get information, like also in that other video where we had Kevin Mitnick pop a box live on the phone in front of DEF CON. So you want to include social engineering in your end user training programs, so that they don't give out information they shouldn't. There are 6 principles that social engineering relies on. One is reciprocity. So if I do you a favor, you're probably going to do me a favor. So if I offer you something for free, or I offer to help you out, you're probably going to tell me something. Then there's commitment and consistency. People are likely, once they help you do something or they commit to doing something, they're likely to consistently do it. So if you get somebody to give you a little piece of information that they probably shouldn't have, but it's such a small thing that they'll help you out with it. Like maybe they need somebody's phone number, and your policy where you work is that you're not supposed to give it out, but they somehow convince you to give it out one time. They're going to come back to you and they're going to ask for more information later because you've already helped them out once. You're going to most likely help them out again. There's social proofing, which is peer pressure, getting you, if everybody is doing it, you're going to do it. Liking, basically coming on as being a very nice guy. You like this or gal. You like this person. They are very friendly to you, and so you're more likely to help them out. Authority, if you believe somebody's in a position of authority, somebody pretending to be a police officer or an FBI agent, or pretending to be a CEO of the company you work for, some kind of authority over you, you're more likely to do what they want, even if it might violate the policy. And then scarcity. This is where there is a shortage of something, and you are likely to jump on the opportunity. So, there's a limited time for this coupon for saving $100 on a video game, like whatever the next World of Warcraft type game is, or whatever. You're willing to give your name and information and email address, or whatever. You give a little bit of information, or install this app for free coupons, or this is a limited time offer. You see this on advertisements all the time. Call now in the next 5 minutes and you're going to get an extra set of Ginzu knives or whatever. That's all falls under scarcity. You're getting an opportunity to get something that is not normally offered to everybody, or has an opportunity to go away that you want to get before it goes away. You're going to do it. You'll notice in these 6 principles are used by salespeople all the time. If you've ever go to buy a car from a new or used car dealership, they've probably used a little bit of each one of these on you in order to convince you to buy a car. So there's good social engineering, and there's bad social engineering. But either way, it's getting somebody to do something that they might otherwise be hesitant or not willing to do. So null sessions. You shouldn't see too many of these unless you still got XP or Windows Server around, but it is something you need to be aware of. It's in the server message block SMB system that allows users to establish null sessions. But like I said, it should be almost extinct now, but you will find occasional Windows XP and Server 2003 systems out there. Sniffing is basically what we do with Wireshark and TCP dump. It's where we're capturing packets off the network and analyzing them, maybe looking for usernames and passwords, or for services that are available on a particular system and what activity is being done, unencrypted data being transferred, or things of that sort. Spoofing. There's lots of different types of spoofing. Basically, it's pretending to be somebody that you're not, usually by IP address, or can be by MAC address, or other ways. There's spoofing emails, where you pretend to be somebody else. You might have had it happen to you, where somebody uses your email address to spoof you and could try to convince somebody to read some spam mail or click a link or something of the sort. There are ways to spoof emails using unsecured mail servers out there, things of that sort. IP address spoofing, which is basically just making it look like an attack is coming from one IP address when it's not. It's coming from another. It's also Smurf attacks, where the attacker sends a spoof packet to the broadcast address of a network, which distributes the packets to all the systems on that network. In the attack, the packet sent by the attacker to the broadcast address is an echo request, with the from address forged so that it appears to be that it's from another system. So you can get an entire network's worth of computers to respond back to a single system by spoofing its address in those packets. And if you do enough of them, you can overwhelm that system with these echoes. Spoofing trust relationships. So if there's some kind of trust relationship going on between two systems, if the two systems are configured to accept the authentication accomplished by each other, an individual logged on to one system might not be forced to go through authentication process on the other. So, for example, systems that are on the same domain, if you log into one system and you have authority to log into other systems, it may not ask you for credentials when connecting to the other systems, such as opening up file shares, or maybe running psexec or some other command or file against the other system. An attacker can take advantage of this arrangement by sending a packet to one system that appears to have come from a trusted system. Since the trusted relationship is in place, the targeted system may perform the requested task without authentication. So it really depends on how it's ensuring or authenticating where it's coming from. Spoofing and sequence numbers. Packets have a sequence, and if you're spoofing, usually you also want to. The person doing the spoofing also has to start to anticipate what the sequence numbers are going to be in order to inject their packets in. Packets are not guaranteed to be received in order, and the sequence numbers are used to help reorder them. So if you can get the packets in there with the right sequence numbers, the packets could be assembled properly on the remote system. In the TCP three-way handshake, 2 sets of sequence numbers are created, as shown in the book. The system chooses a sequence number to send with the original SYN packet, and then the system receiving the SYN packet acknowledges with a SYN ACK. It sends an acknowledgement number back, which is based on the first sequence number plus 1. So if you can see that SYN, that original SYN packet, you can forge the SYN ACK packet with the next sequence number. TCP/IP hijacking or session jacking is the term used to perform the process of taking control of an already established session between a client and a server. The advantage to an attacker hijacking over attempting to penetrate a computer system or network is that the attacker does not have to circumvent any authentication mechanisms, since the user has already authenticated and established a session. Once the user has completed the authorization process, the attacker can then usurp the session and carry on as if the attacker and not the user had authenticated with the process. To prevent the user from noticing anything unusual, the attacker can decide to attack the user's system and perform a DDoS a DOS, denial of service attack on it, taking it down so that the user in the system will not notice the extra traffic that is taking place. Hijack attacks generally are used against web and telnet sessions. Sequence numbers, as they apply to spoofing, also apply to session hijacking, since hijackers will need to provide the correct sequence number to continue the appropriate sessions. Man-in-the-middle attacks is basically as it sounds. Somebody gets into the middle of the flow of communication. The attacker is able to place themselves in the middle of 2 other hosts that are communicating. Ideally, this is done to ensure that all communications going to and from the target host is routed through the attacker host, which is accomplished if the attacker can compromise the router for the target host. The attacker can then observe all the traffic before relaying it and could actually modify or block traffic. To the target host, it appears that the communications are normal, since all affected replies are received. There are numerous methods of initiating a man-in-the-middle attack. One of the common methods is via session hijacking, as we previously talked about. Session hijacking can occur when information such as cookies is stolen, allowing the attacker to impersonate the legitimate session. This attack can be a result of cross-site scripting attacks, which trick a user into executing code, resulting in cookie theft. The amount of information that can be obtained in a man-in-the-middle attack will obviously be limited if the communication is encrypted. Even in this case, however, sensitive information can still be obtained, since knowing the communication is being conducted and between which individuals may in fact provide information that is valuable in certain circumstances. The term man-in-the-middle attack is sometimes also used to refer to a more specific type of attack, one in which the encrypted traffic issue is addressed. If you wanted to communicate securely with your friend Bob, you might ask him for the public key so that you can encrypt your message to him. You, in turn, would supply Bob with your public key. An attacker can conduct a man-in-the-middle attack by intercepting your request for Bob's public key and sending your public key to him. The attacker will replace your public key with their public key, and he or she would send his to Bob, and vice versa, so that they have the keys for what you both are communicating, and then you re-encrypt the message and send with your keys to send it on to the people on either end, and you get a chance to see what's in the middle, see the unencrypted traffic. A replay attack occurs when an attacker captures a portion of communication between 2 parties and retransmits it later. For example, an attacker might replay a series of commands and codes used in a financial transaction to cause a transaction to be conducted multiple times. Generally, replay attacks are associated with attempts to circumvent authentication mechanisms, such as capturing and reuse of a certificate or ticket. There's a vulnerability known as passing the hash, where you basically capture the hash that's sent across the network being used for authentication. The best way to prevent this kind of attack is encryption, cryptographic authentication, and timestamps. If a portion of the certificate or ticket includes a time date stamp or an expiration date time and date stamp, this portion is also encrypted as part of the ticket and certificate, and replaying it at a later time will prove useless since it will be rejected based on it being expired. Transitive access, it means that the attack on a system by violating the trust relationship between two machines, kind of what we talked about before. A simple example is when servers are well protected and clients are not, and the server trusts the clients. In this case, attacking a client can provide transitive access to the servers. So it's using another system in order to gain that access. Spam and spim. We should all know this by now. Spam is unwanted emails, unsolicited emails, often with links to things, many of it inappropriate. It could be links to adult websites. It could be illegal pharmacies, herbal treatments. Sky's the limit on what can be included in spam. And spam is basically instant messaging form of spam, where instant messaging messages are sent out advertising stuff to the recipient in the hopes that they will click a link or purchase a product or whatever that otherwise might not get. So while spam may be to get you to buy a product that you might not need or want by basically overwhelming you with ads, phishing is something different. It's usually a fraudulent email or instant message that is designed to look like something authentic when it's not, like maybe an email from your bank saying that you have a problem with your account and trying to get you to click a link or whatever in order to obtain credentials or infect your system with malware. There's a type of phishing called spear phishing. General phishing, it could be sent to pretty much anybody. They're not looking for anybody in particular. They're just doing a very broad, lack of better words, net is being cast out there to see how many people they could get to do it. Spear phishing is where they come down and they're more narrowly focusing on a fish. Think of it in the sense of, instead of casting the broad net to catch a whole bunch of fish, you're using that spear gun to get that one or two specific fish that you're really looking for. And there's even one that's known as whaling, where it's spear fishing, but for really big targets, like the CEO of a company or something of that sort. Then there's vishing. It's a variation of phishing that uses voice communication technology to obtain information. It takes advantage of the trust that some people place in the phone network. I see these all the time. I get calls all the time. They pretend to be somebody from Microsoft or whatever, and they want to talk to me. I'm very careful about how I answer questions on the phone. I try never to use the word yes. There's a lot of reasons for that. If you ever notice that when you do get some of these calls, they always say the call is being recorded for monitoring and assurance purposes or training purpose or whatever. It's too easy with software to chop up a conversation and get you to say the word, yes, I agree to spend $1 million out of my checking account for your product or whatever. And it's very tough for you to fight because it's your voice. If there was ever came to a court or whatever, they could prove it's your voice, and it could be very hard if they do it very well to prove that it's not you agreeing to do whatever this act was. So I'm very cautious about how I answer any vendor or cold calls I get. I usually say things like correct or affirmative or negative or things of that sort rather than yes or no, because I don't want to provide them with words that could potentially be edited and used against me. Sometimes they're looking for things like just your credit card number, or they're looking to validate an email address that you have or somebody else has in order to use in a phishing attack or spear phishing attack against you later. So they want to know, are you the right target that they want to be going after? So it might ask you things about what your job is there, or who is the person to contact for this particular piece of information from your organization. Other times it could just be simply just a real sales call. Farming is setting up fake websites that look very real. For example, maybe a bank so that if they can get you in a phishing attempt to click on a link and you come to this website, you're like, oh yeah, it is Bank of America, it is Bank of Boston, or Bank of wherever. I'm going to enter in my username and password, and la-di-da, I'll fix whatever the problem was that email said I had. So it looks like you're doing a legitimate action. In reality, it's not. It's a fake website that's set up to look very real, act very much the same way that you expect it to act, and capture information such as your username and password or something else that they're looking for. Or maybe even be using it to get you to install a piece of malware. There's different types of scanning attacks. Most popular is just a ping sweep using a program like Nmap or whatever. Scanners can be used to send specifically crafted packets in an attempt to determine TCP and UDP port status. Attacks on encryption usually is due to weak keys. You're using, let's say, a 40-bit key instead of a 128-bit key for a symmetric algorithm, or weak passwords. It could be an exhaustive search of key space. So with the 40-bit password, you have fewer combinations of letters that will produce the right hash in order to allow a brute force attack. You got with a 40-bit encryption scheme, it's easier to attack using brute force attack, which tests all the possible keys one by one, than it is a 256-bit, let's say, base scheme. This is easily demonstrated by imagining a scheme where there are that employs a 2-bit key, and if the resulting cipher text were completely unreadable, performing a brute force attack until one key is found that can decrypt the cipher text. It wouldn't take long to do. Then there's indirect attacks. One of the most common ways of attacking an encryption scheme is to find weaknesses in the mechanism surrounding the cryptography. Examples include poor random number generators, unprotected key exchanges, keys stored on hard drives without sufficient protection, and other general programmatic errors, such as buffer overflow. In attacks that targets these types of weaknesses, it's not the cryptographic algorithm itself that is being attacked, but rather the implementation of the algorithm in the real world. Address system attacks, many aspects of a computer system that are controlled by the use of IP addresses. So address system attacks are basically where you manipulate a IP address in order to get the services you want, or get the authentication you want, maybe. Some address attacks could involve manipulating a domain name service, or a domain name system, so that when you put in, let's say, www.google.com, instead of going to the real Google servers, it diverts you to another one that allows them to capture what you're searching for, or infect your system with a virus. There's cache poisoning, which many network activities rely upon various addressing schemes to function properly. When you point your web browser at your bank by typing the bank's URL, your browser consults the system's cache first before it goes out to a DNS to find out where it should be going to for an IP address. So if you can get into the system's cache, or let's say the local host file, knowing the order in which the system's search to resolve a domain name to an IP address, if you can get into one of the early stages before it goes out to the general DNS servers that they have no control over, you could redirect traffic. So DNS poisoning is one way to do that. ARP poisoning is similar. It's basically changing the MAC address of a system to point to a different MAC address for the same IP address that it's trying to communicate with. Now, password attacks. There's you can do things such as password guessing attacks, where poorly chosen passwords, such as maybe somebody's birth date or their cat's name or whatever, can easily be guessed based upon information known about that person, or their default passwords, or commonly used passwords like password123 or something of that sort. Dictionary attack is kind of falls into the frequently used passwords. Usually there are dictionaries or lists of common passwords that have been discovered that can be run against the account that you're trying to get into, looking to basically prevent from doing a full brute force attack. Now, brute force attack is basically testing every conceivable combination. So it could be 00001, 00002, 0003, and so on and so forth. It incrementally changes through until it finds the right combination to be the password that you're trying to use to get into the system or whatever. Then there's a hybrid that uses a combination of both a dictionary and a brute force. And then there's birthday, which is a birthday attack is a special type of brute force attack that gets its name from something known as the birthday paradox, which states that in a group of at least 23 people, the chance that two individuals have the same birthday is greater than 50%. So the same phenomenon applies to passwords, where the number of passwords can be quite a bit large, but there is a possibility of, at some point or another, two different passwords generating the same hash. So you want to know, depending on the number of bits in the algorithm, what is the likelihood, or how many possible combinations does it take to get that 50% chance or greater of there being a combined hash or a similar hash, and start using that to your advantage with doing a brute force attack. There's pass the hash, which I was starting on before, which the hash, it's a technique where the attacker captures the hash used to authenticate a process and then can use that hash by injecting it into a process in place of the password. This highly technical attack, it requires a good significant portion of requires a significant technical knowledge in order to achieve it. It's usually targeting the Windows authentication process, injecting a copy of a password hash directly into the system. The attacker does not need to know the password, but instead can use a captured hash and inject it in directly, which will verify correctly, granting access. As this is a very technically specific hack, tools have been developed to facilitate its operation. Software exploitation, we've kind of covered this before too. Buffer overflows and integer overflows, basically creating numbers or data input that causes the buffer to overflow outside of what it was intending to hold in order to cause a piece of code to spill over into memory and execute. This can be mitigated by properly programming so that input fields are validated before the data that's being inputted will be committed into memory, and can cause the buffer to overflow. And then there's client-side attacks, things like injection attacks, header manipulations, typo squatting, URL hijacking, drive-by downloads, and watering holes. Watering holes are a good one. You can run into those by doing your job. Basically, it's a site that's set up that you are likely to want to go to, because this is where you expect to find answers or find information, and it's meant to draw people into a single location so they can be attacked. Usually with drive-bys with software or something of that sort. Watering holes are complex to achieve and appear to be backed by nation-states or other high-profile attackers who have resources. In light of the stakes, the typical attack vector will be a zero-day attack to further avoid detection. In some cases, the watering hole attack is also used in drive-by attacks, which are browsers are used to navigate the internet using HTTP and other protocols to bring files to the user's computer. Some of these are image files, some are scripts, and some are text-based. And together they form the web pages that we see. Users don't typically ask for each component on a page. They download as part of the HTML for the page, and it's the job of the browser to identify the needed files and fetch them. A new type of attack takes advantage of this mechanism by initiating downloads of malware, whether a user clicks it or not. This automated download of material is referred to as drive-by attacks. Drive-by downloads can occur for a couple of different mechanisms. It's possible for an ad that is rotating into content on a reputable site to contain a drive-by download. Users don't have control over what ads are presented. And second, more common method is mistyped URLs, or I have seen them, like I said before, with a watering hole, bringing people in that you want specifically, looking for a specific topic or whatever. So the advanced persistent threat is a method of attack that primarily focuses on stealth and continuous presence on a system. APTs are very advanced. They require teams to maintain access and typically involve high-value targets. APTs typically involve specifically crafted attack vectors coupled with phishing or spear phishing for the initial entry. Then techniques are employed to develop backdoors and multiple account access routes. The skill level of the attacker is typically exceedingly high, and their aim is to completely own the system without being detected. Once the attacker has completed penetrating a system, including elements like the ability to read emails, to watch for reports of detection, they can accomplish their goals of stealing material. Their long-term objectives are to remain hidden and undetected while harvesting information over months and years. APTs are the attack method of choice for nation-states and industrial espionage. If you remember, I talked about how sometimes before they do anything with the time bombs, they wait a long enough period of time where they infect all of the backups. Here, with APTs, if they've been in your network for years, and I'm not kidding you when I say years, there have been detections where they, when they did their research, they've been in the network for as long as 10 years. If they've been in there for years, it's very hard to not have to rebuild everything from scratch, because they're in all your backups, and it takes a lot to rebuild all your systems. So APTs are a real big threat, especially to larger industry and to government. Signs of an APT attack are usually off-hour activities. So if people are logging into accounts at 2 o'clock in the morning when there shouldn't be really anybody logging in at that time, that could be a sign of an APT attack. There could be multiple backdoors, and I will tell you, more often than not, there's not just one means of them getting in. They have multiple, because they anticipate at some point or another that something might be found and they need to get around it. They need to know that when you do find it and fix it, that they can still get into the system. Finding unknown files, the APTs tend to bundle exfiltration data and keep it in encrypted form before slowly siphoning it out. Finding spear phishing emails and pass-the-hash tools, and strange data flows. So if you're seeing a large amount of data moving out of a particular computer on a weekend night when nobody should be there moving any data, that might be the sign of an APT. They'll use things like remote access trojans or whatever, where they basically get a nice backdoor, or they install some kind of tool that allows them to take control of your system. Tools for attacking, by no means is this an exhaustive list. It's barely scratching the surface of what's out there. But Metasploit, it's a framework that enables attackers to exploit systems and inject payloads into a system. Metasploit is widely distributed, powerful, and one of the most popular tools used by attackers. When new vulnerabilities are discovered in the system, Metasploit modules are quickly created in the community, and making this tool a go-to tool for most professionals. Backtrack Kali, Kali being the replacement for Backtrack, is a Linux distribution that is preloaded with many security tools, and this is what we'll be using in our course. It comes pre-configured and preloaded with everything, including a Metasploit that allows you to get into the system. And most of the tools that's listed on this page here are available in Kali. Social Engineering Toolkit, it's a set of tools that can be used to target attacks towards people using systems. It has applets that can be used to create phishing emails, Java attack code, and other social engineering type attacks. The set is included in Kali, as I just said. Cobalt Strike, This tool basically it's a easier, friendlier version of Metasploit. It's a powerful application that can replicate advanced threats and assist in the execution of targeted attacks on systems. Cobalt Strike expands the Armitage tool capabilities, adding advanced attack methods. Core Impact is an expensive commercial suite of penetration tools. It has a wide spectrum of tools and provides attack abilities across an enterprise. Although expensive, the level of automation and integration makes this a powerful suite of tools. And Burp Suite became a port scanner tool with a limited additional functionality in the area of intercepting proxies, web application scanning, and web-based content. Burp Suite is a commercial tool, but is reasonably priced and well liked and utilized in the penetration market. In the computer security world, auditing is a process of assessing the security state of an organization compared against an established standard. So, depending on which standard you use, it could be the ISO, it could be COBIT, or something of that sort. The important element here are the standards. The organizations from different communities have widely different standards. So it really depends what industry you're working in. If you're working in, for example, retail or financial, you might be required to follow the PCI, the payment card industry standards, as part of the contract in order to receive electronic payment funds, things of that sort. In a security assessment, general security best practices can be used, but they may lack regulatory teeth that standards often provide. Penetration tests can also be encountered. These tests are conducted against an organization to determine whether any holes in the organization's security can be found. The goal of penetration test is to penetrate the security rather than measure it against some standard. Penetration tests are often viewed as white hat hacking in that the methods used often mirror those of the attackers, often called black hats. You should conduct some form of security auditing or assessment on a regular basis. Your organization might spend quite a bit of time on security, or funds at least on security, and it's important to measure how effective the effort is. In certain communities, audits can be regulated on a periodic basis with very specific standards that must be measured against. Even if your organization is not part of such a community, periodic assessments are important. Many particulars can be evaluated during assessment, but at a minimum, the security perimeter with all of its components, including host-based security, should be examined, as well as the organization's policies, procedures, and guidelines governing security. Employee training is another aspect that should be studied, since employees are the target of social engineering and password guessing attacks. Security audits and assessments and penetration tests are big business, and a number of organizations can perform them for you. The costs of these vary widely depending on the extent of the test you want, the background of the company you are contracting with, and the size of the organization to be tested. A powerful mechanism for detecting security incidents is the use of security logs. For logs to be effective, however, they require monitoring, and monitoring of event logs can provide information concerning the events that have been logged. This requires making decisions in advance about the items to be logged. Logging too many items uses a lot of space and increases the workload for personnel who are assigned the task of reading those logs. And the same is true for security, audit, and access, and application-specific logs. The bottom line is that although logs are valuable, preparation is needed to determine the correct items to log, the mechanisms to which the logs are to be reviewed by. SIM systems, which are security and information event management software, can assist in log file analysis. They work like a syslog server, and they capture the logs and then use filters to help you find specific types of security events or to perform certain kind of reports. So you want to perform the routine audits, and some of the things you also want to look at are user access. Who has administrative rights, who doesn't, and do the people who have it need it? Do the people need an account to begin with? When a user changes jobs, are the rights being terminated from the previous job, or are they continuing over to the next job and occurring a bunch of rights that they don't need anymore? Storage. Many organizations have policies governing what can be stored on a company resource. such as music files or videos or something illegal or undesirable material could be prohibited from it. So you want to make sure that the things that are being stored out on your network are authorized to be there. Retention: how long does an organization keep its logs or other documents? Are they required by law to keep them for a certain period of time? And if so, are your policies matching what the law says? And firewall rules. Periodic audits of firewall rules are important to ensure that firewall is filtering traffic as desired and help to ensure that the temporary rules don't end up as permanent ones in the set. And with changing threats, you're going to want to change your firewall rules to match any new major threats that you know of that can be stopped at the perimeter.